language is much more than words and definitions. It's definitely a way we touch one another and allow ourselves to be touched. But when our language is depleted, it's very difficult to hear, sense, believe, take it in. I know when I say I love you and I love my new car, I'm speaking about something different. But sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. It might be difficult for you to know if I know the difference between loving you and loving my car. I can't explain it necessarily, but there it is. Sometimes there are no words, and yet we need words somehow or another to convey what is going on in our hearts. When there are no words, there is no consciousness. Sanskrit has 96 words for love. Ancient Persian has 80. Greek has 4. English has 1. Take a look at how tremendously diminished love becomes when we don't have a way of expressing that. Or we don't have the words. Words pass us by. It's nice to have the words. We need them sometimes. Eskimos have 30 words for snow because it's a life or death experience living in that particular element. In fact, they would probably die of clumsiness if they only had one word. I wonder what it would be like if we had 30 words for love. Or 2. Or just more than 1. Not to get so locked in that one little way of expressing ourselves and not even knowing whether or not it really is getting across the way we'd like to get it across. I even found myself doing that when I was putting this talk together. Another talk about love. Oh no, how boring. Here it is. I did that last week, didn't I? I did it the week before. I did it the week before. See, the difficulty is love is not something you do or something you get or something you say or even believe. It's who you are. And so not being able to realize that particular truth, it's like what Alan Watts called, it's like trying to bite your own teeth. Right? It doesn't work. When we're talking about something on the outside that really only exists, or positively exists, inside. It's a mystery beyond words, and yet we need words. As Paul said, if I have not love, I'm like a tinkling cymbal, tinkling bell on a brass cymbal. I'm just a noisemaker. Without the words, without the concept, much more than a feeling, as Melba's song said, much more than all of that. But if we don't have a basis to be able to jump off of, it's very, very difficult to really get a sense of, I know how I love you. How can I let you know that? How can I let you know that? How can I live out of that truth? How can I remember it? Love is an energy. It's not as the reading said this morning, it's both a noun and a verb. And a word that's being used quite a bit in a lot of spiritual literature right now is aligning yourself to that energy. And what that means essentially is, if someone says to you, I love you, and you know they really mean it, it could be like a cotton ball arrow that just sort of hits me and goes, boom. I just don't take it in. When you give yourself the opportunity to take that in as being the truth, I love you. What would that be like? How would that be different from just hearing the words or just letting the words sort of bounce off you? The transformational power of love is the most powerful thing in the world, more powerful than anything else, anything beyond the material world. But I've got to believe in the transformational power of love before it's going to work. I can say it, I can read it, I can write it, but I got to believe it first. If I don't, it's not going anyplace. If I don't believe love can change the world, then it won't. It's that simple, and sometimes that profound. I asked you a couple of weeks ago, how much time did you spend living in your spiritual self, living in your spiritual nature? Well, I'd like to turn that question around a little bit and say, how much time during a day, during a week, do you recognize how much you are loved? And maybe how much of that time are you trying to get love but don't know how to do it? Did you ever do this as a little kid? You're really having a bad day, and you kind of curl up inside yourself, and you're dying for somebody to pay attention to you. And as soon as mom or dad or somebody says, "What's the matter?" you go, "Ah! I'm dying for somebody to pay attention to me," but as soon as they do, I find I don't want it. I think it was Albert Schweitzer said, we have all of this stuff, but we're dying of loneliness. So where do we go from here? I like to examine possibilities. Just take a look at things maybe a little bit differently. Maybe in a way somebody else might look at them. It might be different from the way I do, just so I can take that in. And so the subject matter today, or this morning, is love. Whatever that means to you, or whatever you're trying to stretch to make it mean for you. So I remember years ago I did a little experiment with myself. I was intellectually involved, but it wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was beyond an emotional exercise too. But it involved my thinking, it involved my feeling, and it also involved my sense of something that went beyond words. And so I was looking for a way to be able to express or define, not define it so much, but to express it might be a better word to use. And the first one I came across was from a science fiction book called A Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. It was one of the hippie Bibles of the 60s. Some of you might remember that. Some of you might be as old as I am. A stranger in a strange land. And these two characters were talking to one another, and one says, "What is love?" and said, "Oh, everybody from Jesus to Shakespeare to Buddha have been trying to find it, but I'll give you a definition. Love is that state where someone else's happiness is essential to your own. Love is that state where someone else's happiness is essential to your own." And I really loved that. I really liked that. I really connected with that as being. And then what happened was this whole codependency movement came in. And it sort of blew up that particular, and I'm really sorry it blew it up, because I brought it back again and said, there's a really, really deep truth to that. When your happiness is my wish and my desire, and it doesn't mean happiness in an emotional sense like buying me a new car. It means your peace of mind, your ability to accept love, your ability to resonate with the truth of who you are. That's important to me. In fact, that's most important to me. Where someone else's happiness is essential to your own. And then I came across Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled. And he defined love this way. He said, love is the ability to stretch oneself for one's own spiritual growth or the growth of another. The ability to stretch oneself for one's own spiritual growth and the growth of another. And I really resonated with that one too. The ability to stretch. It's not static. It's not, I love you. Stretch oneself for one's own spiritual growth or the growth of another. I still stay with that one. Still come back to that one a lot. And then I was reading a book called If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. And it wasn't a book about murdering fat little old Oriental men. It was written by a psychiatrist, Sheldon Kopp, who worked out of Washington, D.C. area. And what the title of the book meant was that don't give your power away to anybody else. If you have a quality that you admire in somebody else, recognize that the reason why you see that quality in somebody else is because the seeds of that quality are within you. So it's okay to commend somebody for what's going on in their life and maybe the gifts, wonderful gifts they have, but don't deny the fact that if you can see them in somebody else, the seeds of that gift are inside of yourself. And he said this. He said, love is sometimes living with the helpless knowing that I can do nothing about another person's pain. Love is sometimes living with the helpless knowing that I can do nothing for another person's pain. And I found the truth of that. I remember when my father died, and I was trying to console my mom. You know, taking her out to dinner and cooking her dinner and doing this and doing that and doing this and doing that. And she finally said, "Stop. I need to grieve." I couldn't do anything else for her except be there. See, that's a catch. I can't do anything for you, but I can be there for you. When part of my research for putting this talk together, I found something online about a whole bunch of kids were describing what love was. And this was a little child, I think she was about 6 or 7 years old, who said this. There was sort of it wasn't really a contest, but it was kids donating their ideas about love and picking out the ones that were best. The one that caught most people's attention was this. A 4-year-old child whose next door neighbor was an elderly gentleman who had recently lost his wife. Upon seeing the man cry, the little boy went into the old gentleman's yard and climbed onto his lap and just sat there. And when his mother asked when he came home what he had said to the neighbor, the little boy said, "Nothing. I just helped him cry." I can't do anything about your pain. I can be there for you. Beyond words. Beyond words. Years ago, there was a study that was done about a couple of orphanages in Eastern Europe. With the attrition rate and the death rate of children was just absolutely out of this. It was horrible. It was awful. Except for this one section of this one orphanage that all the babies seemed to have survived. They couldn't figure out why, and so they finally followed it around. Found out there was one nurse there who instead of just changing the diapers and putting a bottle in the kid's mouth, she picked every one of these babies up and held them. And just because she held them and loved them, they lived, they survived. What a difference. Years ago, I was going through a tremendously dark time in my life. Down, depressed, all of the down and dirty things you might be able to think of. I even remember telling Margot one time, at one point, I said, "I know why people take their lives." I said, "I'm not going to. I know there's more than that. But I know why. If somebody didn't have whatever spirituality I had at that particular moment, I can understand why someone would want to leave." And I remembered waking up one night, and Margot had her hand on my back. And I could hear her whispering. She didn't know I was awake. I could hear her whispering, "I love you, I love you, I love you." And at that moment, everything changed. I can't say my depression lifted and the birds were singing. Not that at all. Something shifted inside my being. And I knew there was something much more than my pain. I knew there was something much more, that love was more powerful than anything, any kind of darkness, any kind of depression, anything else that I might have been going through. Unconditional love is just that. It is love without any limits. As I said in the meditation earlier today, if someone's outside the circle, it doesn't work. The way another child put it was, I think this was a 6-year-old girl, if you want to learn to love better, you should start with a friend that you don't like. If you really want to learn how to love better, you should start with a friend that you don't like. As Jesus said, if you just love those who love you back, what good is that? I want you to learn how to I want you to learn how to love those who don't love you back. That's where the truth is. That's where the challenge is. That's where it's difficult. And it's the reason why we keep coming back, another sermon about love, and there'll probably be another one next week or the week after or the week after or the week after, and we keep coming back to it. You know why? Because I'm still not convinced, we're still not convinced that it's possible. If the power of love can change the world the way it can change, I've got to believe it's going to change, because if I don't believe it's going to change the world, it's not going to work. And we keep coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it. The reason why is because all you got to do is look around and say, well, it hasn't worked. The reason why it hasn't worked is we haven't done it yet. It's like G.K. Chesterton was talking to a friend of his one day, and his friend said, you know, you still consider yourself a Christian. Why do you consider yourself a Christian? Christianity has been tried and found wanting. He said, no, I'm sorry. It's never really been tried. I don't think it's ever. If it's really been tried, then we would see the changes. I really believe that. Really, another child said this one. You really shouldn't say I love you unless you mean it. But if you mean it, you should say it a lot, because people forget. Isn't that great? Don't say it unless you mean it. But if you mean it, say it again and say it often. Of course, then we have self-love, which we probably should have started with. But we started with self-love. That usually gets buried under all kinds of other stuff. I imagine what it would be like someday, before you go to bed tonight, that an angel comes along and puts a little tape recorder in your head. No, when you wake up in the morning, this is what happens. You wake up in the morning, an angel comes along, puts a little tape recorder in your head, and says, this recorder is only going to go on, turn on, and record the message when you say something negative about yourself or think something negative about yourself. Okay? It's the only time it's going to go on. And then tonight, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to pop that little recorder out of your head, and then I'm going to have you listen. How long is that recording going to be? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? A couple of hours? And we wonder why we have a difficult time loving ourselves. Do I have the ability or the consciousness these days to reflect that I am just as unconditionally loved as anyone or anything else? Can I know that love is growing, tripping, wrestling, moving, yearning, stretching towards oneness, while living life as fully as I can in the here and now? How can God's love, how can unconditional love not be enough? I don't create it, I surrender to it. What does my life mean if it's not loving? How can I make my day more loving than it was, let's say 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago? How can I stretch myself for my own spiritual growth or the growth of another? How can I begin to recognize that I might not be able to do anything for you, take away your pain, but I can be here with you? And that might mean even though you're 5,000 miles away, singer-songwriter Jackson Browne once wrote, I want to know what became of the changes we waited for love to bring. Were they only the fitful dreams of a greater awakening? I believe that's true. I believe that is awakening in each one of us. Can be, if we believe in the truth of it. I'd like to close with another quote from another little person. Her name was Anna. Anna was an orphan child who was adopted by a young man and his mom in war-torn England. And she had this to say, does Mr. God love us truly? Sure thing, I said. Mr. God loves everything. But Mr. God ain't like us. We're a little bit like Mr. God, but not much yet. You see Finn happened to be the young man who found her on the street. Mr. God is different because he can finish things that we can't. Get this. I can't finish loving you because I shall be dead millions of years before I can finish. I can't finish loving you. Probably be dead for 1,000,000 years before I can finish. But Mr. God can finish loving you, so it's not the same kind of love, is it? Love is who we are. It's also where we're going. It's the meaning of life and the purpose of living. It's the essence of creation and the power of transformation. It's what holds us together and which dissolves the self-imposed barriers that keep us apart. We ultimately find it within ourselves, but realize we only find it with one another. We ultimately find it within ourselves, but realize we only find it with one another. It's a very simple formula that I've learned to use periodically in my life when I remember it. To ask myself a very simple question. Is what I am thinking or the thought that I'm holding on to or the action that I'm thinking about doing in a moment or so, does it open my heart or does it close my heart? Does it open my heart or does it close my heart? And from that I can tell where I am, what I'm doing. It gives me a compass, it gives me a direction in life. It lets me do what I need to do at each moment when I need to do it. It allows me to be with you. It allows me to be by myself. Does it open my heart? Does it close my heart? What would allow me to be a more loving being today? To you, to the world, to, as that little girl said, to the person I don't like very much. To realize that I can't finish loving you. I would be dead 1,000,000 years before I could finish. But Mr. God can love you inside and love you outside. Can love you completely in this particular moment, this very moment. You cannot be loved any more than you are in this moment. And yet in the next moment you can be loved even more than you are in this one. It goes beyond my words, it goes beyond my understanding, but my heart resonates with that truth. And so I thank you again and again and again and again for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of love with you. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all of that great stuff. Thank you.